The fluorescent lights in the mess hall after lights out, chairs still warm, hummed with a low, dying whine, a sound I'd grown accustomed to. It was a sterile, unforgiving kind of quiet, broken only by the occasional drip from a faulty tap in the kitchen beyond the swinging doors. I sat at a table near the back, my fingers tracing the faint, almost invisible grain of the laminate. Another day bled into another night, each indistinguishable from the last. A monotonous tapestry woven from regret and the metallic taste of burnt coffee. My life had become a series of deliberate diminutions. No grand designs, no intricate blueprints, just the stark, unyielding lines of survival. It had been like this for 3 years, ever since the smoke cleared, revealing the skeletal remains of what was once a home, a sanctuary, a monument to my architectural ambition, and my greatest failure. I could still feel the heat on my face, not from the lingering warmth of the chair beneath me, but from memory. The crackle of timbers, the roar that swallowed screams, the acrid, choking scent of charring wood and plaster. Every night I rebuilt it in my mind, beam by beam, wall by wall, searching for the flaw, the fatal miscalculation in my own design that had consumed them. My wife, my children, all gone. And I, the architect, the creator, the supposed protector, had been the unwitting instrument of their end. Guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making each breath a conscious effort. It was the constant companion, whispering accusations in the empty spaces of my life. I had tried to outrun it, to bury it under layers of self-imposed solitude, but it clung to me like the lingering smell of smoke on old clothes. My days were structured around avoiding complexity. Simple meals, simple tasks, simple thoughts. The mess hall was a ritual, a place where I ate among others, but remained profoundly alone. Tonight, however, the silence felt different. A prickle of unease had settled on my skin since morning, a faint tremor that vibrated just beneath the surface of my determined apathy. It started with the letter. Not an email, not a call, but heavy, cream-colored stationery, embossed with a crest I didn't recognize. It had arrived that morning, delivered by a messenger with an unnervingly solemn expression, his eyes avoiding mine as if I carried a contagion. Instead, the words had jumped off the page, shattering the fragile peace I'd constructed. My great-uncle, a man I barely remembered, a distant, enigmatic figure from faded photographs, was dead, and I, Raj, was his sole inheritor, the ancestral home, a sprawling, ancient property nestled deep within the countryside, a place my father had spoken of with a mixture of reverence and unease, a place I had never seen. My great-uncle had been a recluse, living out his days in that isolated estate. No one visited him, no one spoke of him. He was a forgotten branch of a withered family tree, and now his forgotten legacy was mine. The solicitor, a lean, severe woman with eyes like polished stones, had met me in a small, windowless office later that afternoon. Her voice was clipped, professional, devoid of warmth. She'd explained the terms, the conditions, the sheer scale of the inheritance. Not just the house, but its contents, its lands, its considerable debts. Her words had painted a picture of crumbling grandeur, a place steeped in history, perhaps even decay. "It's quite a responsibility, Mr. Sharma," she'd said, her gaze unblinking. "The estate requires significant attention, and the house itself, it has a reputation." I had only nodded, my throat tight. A reputation? What kind of reputation? It felt weighty, not just with metal, but with unspoken stories. Now, sitting in the quiet mess hall, the key was a lump in my pocket, a constant reminder. The house. It was a new project, a new design, perhaps, a chance to build something again or to tear it all down. My hands, usually steady, trembled slightly as I picked up the chipped ceramic mug. I didn't drink it. Why me? Why now? I had cut myself off from everything, from everyone. This inheritance felt less like a gift and more like a summons, a hook dragging me back into a world I'd painstakingly tried to escape. What kind of reputation did the solicitor mean, and what secrets did my great-uncle, a man I barely knew, truly leave behind? I had only nodded, my throat tight. A reputation. She hadn't elaborated, merely offered a tight, almost pitying smile before handing me a heavy brass key, cold and ancient, in my palm. Now, sitting in the quiet, the smell of stale coffee and disinfectant clinging to the air, I traced the intricate patterns etched into the key's head. The mess hall after lights out, chairs still warm from the previous dinner service, offered little comfort. My temporary lodging, a utilitarian room with cinder block walls, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a waiting room for something I couldn't quite name. The solicitor's words echoed. Ancestral home. A phrase that conjured images of sprawling estates and manicured gardens, not the dilapidated structure I knew from old photographs. My family, or what was left of it, had always kept a deliberate distance from that place, a hushed reverence mixed with something akin to fear whenever it was mentioned. I'd never understood it. Now, with the weight of my own design failures pressing down, the idea of a fresh start, no matter how grim the canvas, felt like a desperate necessity. The drive north was long, the landscape slowly shedding the last vestiges of urban sprawl for a wilder, untamed green. The road narrowed, eventually becoming a gravel path that crunched under the tires of the rental car. Trees, thick and gnarled, formed a canopy overhead, their branches reaching, intertwining, blocking out the sky. A perpetual twilight clung to the lane. The air grew cooler, carrying the damp scent of loam and decaying leaves, a smell that seeped into the car, filling my lungs with the breath of the wilderness. Then, through a break in the foliage, it appeared, not a grand reveal but a slow, creeping emergence. The house. It wasn't just old, it was tired. Its gables sagged like weary shoulders, the paint peeled from the clapboards in curling strips, exposing the dark, weathered wood beneath. Windows, many boarded up, stared out like vacant eyes. A few panes remained, reflecting the muted sky in a dull, milky sheen. No manicured gardens here, just an overgrown wilderness that clawed at the foundation, reclaiming the land. My family's reputation, I realized, wasn't just spoken, it was etched into the very stones of this place. I cut the engine. The sudden silence was vast, punctuated only by the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird. The air felt heavy, stagnant, as if the house itself held its breath. This was it, my fresh start, my penance. A thick layer of dust covered everything: the porch railings, the front door, even the air itself. The front door, a heavy oak slab, groaned in protest as I pushed the key into the lock. The tumblers turned with a rusty click, a sound that felt ancient and final. I fumbled for my phone, its flashlight beam cutting a weak swath through the gloom. The entrance hall was cavernous, stretching into unseen corners. Cobwebs, thick and gray, draped from the chandelier, transforming it into a monstrous silken cocoon. Furniture, shrouded in white sheets, stood like ghostly sentinels. Each step I took echoed, the floorboards groaning under my weight. I found a light switch near the door, flicked it. Nothing. The house was dead, electrically at least. My first task was practical: find a window that opened, let in some air, some light. I moved through the ground floor, each room a tableau of forgotten lives. A dining room with a massive table. A parlor with a grand piano covered in a thick shroud. The sheer scale of the place, its echoing emptiness, pressed in on me. I tried to focus on the work ahead, the sheer amount of cleaning, repairing. This was an architect's challenge, I told myself, a project. In what seemed to be a study, I found a window that wasn't boarded. With a grunt, I managed to pry it open, the sash scraping against years of accumulated grime. It felt like a small victory. I spent the rest of the afternoon methodically uncovering furniture, sweeping away the thickest layers of dust with a broom I found leaning in a utility closet. Each movement stirred up clouds of fine powder, catching in my throat. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges, I returned to the study, hoping to organize a small corner for my architectural plans. I pulled the sheet from a large, heavy desk. Beneath it, the polished wood gleamed faintly in the fading light. I ran my hand over its surface, feeling the cool, smooth grain. That's when I noticed it. A small, intricately carved wooden box, no larger than my palm, sat squarely in the center of the desk. I hadn't seen it when I'd pulled off the sheet. It hadn't been there, I was certain. My hand paused, hovering over the box. Had I simply missed it, overlooked it in my haste to clear the desk? The thought was a comfort, a rational explanation. But a prickle of unease started in my neck, crawling upwards. I hadn't seen it. I knew I hadn't. I picked up the box. It was heavier than it looked, solid, almost dense. No seams or hinges were visible, no obvious way to open it. A faint, almost imperceptible warmth emanated from it, not the warmth of something recently held, but a deeper, internal heat. Where had it come from? Now, sitting in the quiet, I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. The heavy brass key still felt cold against my palm, a constant reminder of the estate agent's cryptic words. A reputation. Sleep wouldn't come. My mind churned with the image of the burned-out shell of my own design, the faces of my family. Guilt was a heavy cloak, smothering me even in this new, supposedly safe, ancestral home. The silence in the house was too profound, punctuated only by the groan of old timber and the faint whistle of wind through unseen cracks. My feet, bare on the cold floorboards, guided me. I needed to do something, see something, even if it was just to prove to myself that this house was nothing more than an old structure, not a repository of unseen eyes. A long, winding corridor, unlit, stretched before me. I followed it, my hand trailing along the damp, textured wallpaper. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of dust and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood mixed with dried roses. It was unsettling. My breath hitched. The corridor opened into a vast, cavernous space. No windows, just high ceilings lost in gloom. This was it, the mess hall after lights out, chairs still warm. Even in the dim spill of moonlight from a distant skylight, I could make out rows of long, heavy wooden tables, flanked by mismatched chairs. A faint, lingering warmth radiated from some of the chairs, a ghost of recent occupancy. Chairs still warm. My stomach clenched. Had I not been the only one here? The estate agent had assured me the house was empty, unoccupied for decades. A shiver traced a path down my spine. I reached out, my fingers hovering over the worn wood of a chairback. It wasn't just my imagination. The wood was distinctly warm, as if someone had just risen from it moments ago. Nothing. Just the vast, empty room. The metallic sweet smell intensified, making my nostrils prickle. My heart began to thrum against my ribs, not a frantic beat, but a heavy, insistent rhythm. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the sun, earlier in the day, had warmed the wood through some obscure thermal property. A faint scrape echoed from the far end of the room, like wood dragging on stone. I froze, every muscle in my body tightening. It felt like the air itself was holding its breath. My eyes darted from table to table. I walked slowly, my footsteps unnervingly loud on the flagstone floor. As I passed one of the larger, more ornate tables, something caught my eye. A faint discoloration on the underside of the tabletop near the edge. I knelt, my knees protesting on the cold stone. It wasn't just a stain. It was a shallow, almost invisible carving, a series of intertwining symbols I didn't recognize. And then next to the carving, a small, almost perfectly hidden drawer. It was flush with the wood, no handle, no obvious way to open it. My fingers explored the edges, searching for a seam, a release. My breath hitched when I felt a faint give. Inside, resting on the faded fabric, were two items: a tarnished silver locket, its surface dulled by age, and a brittle, yellowed piece of paper, folded multiple times. The locket was cool to the touch, surprisingly heavy. I snapped it open, empty. No photograph, no hair, just the impression of absence. I carefully unfolded the paper. It crackled under my touch, threatening to disintegrate. The script was spidery, faded ink on brittle parchment. I had to squint to read it in the dim light. The vessel must be pure, the offering true. Let grief be the key and guilt the binding chain. So shall the house endure. It felt like ice shards in my veins. This wasn't some historical anecdote. This was a ritual, a pact. A sudden sharp gust of wind slammed against the outside of the building, rattling an unseen window, or was it inside? I couldn't tell. The air around me dropped several degrees and the metallic sweet scent surged, overwhelming my senses. It was no longer just a smell. It was a presence, heavy and suffocating. I felt a distinct pressure against my back, as if someone stood directly behind me, breathing down my neck. My skin crawled. I spun around. The paper still clutched in one hand, the locket in the other. But the pressure remained, an invisible weight pushing down on my shoulders. It felt too real, too intimate. My heart hammered now, a frantic drum against my ribs. My hands shook, the paper trembling in my grasp. The price of peace is paid in anguish. Asterisk, the words echoed in my mind, taking on a new, sinister resonance. This house, my family's legacy, what had they done? What had they paid? I stumbled back. My legs suddenly weak, my gaze fixed on the empty space where I had felt the presence. Was it still there, watching me, waiting for me to understand? What did the vessel mean, and what was it enduring? Seemed to drift from the upper floors, ethereal and profoundly sad. My mind raced, searching for an explanation. A neighbor, unlikely, the nearest house was miles away. The wind? No, this was distinctly melodic. I crept out of the library, my footsteps muffled by the thick dust, and started up the main staircase. Each step creaked under my weight, the old wood groaning like a living thing. The humming grew a little louder, leading me towards the long, dark corridor on the second floor. It was coming from behind a closed door, one I hadn't yet dared to open, shrouded in shadow and a palpable sense of unease. What lay behind that door, and who or what was singing? My hand trembled as I reached for the cold brass doorknob. It was tarnished, almost black with age. It wasn't a language I recognized, but the tone was undeniably hostile, filled with a raw, ancient anger. I recoiled, my heart leaping into my throat. This wasn't just an old house, it was something else entirely, something alive. My architectural training, my reliance on logic and structure, was crumbling around me. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. To get the quiet of the mess hall after lights out felt less like peace and more like a held breath. I was the only one left, sitting at a long, scarred metal table, the plastic chair still radiating a faint, residual warmth from the dinner crowd. The scent of overcooked vegetables and industrial-strength cleaner hung heavy in the air, a damp, cloying film that clung to the back of my throat. My fingers, still numb from the cold brass key, drummed a restless rhythm against the worn laminate surface. Sleep had become a luxury I couldn't afford, not with the estate agent's words echoing like a persistent drone in the cavern of my skull. A reputation. My mind kept replaying the image of the burned-out shell of my old home, the one I had designed with such meticulous care, the one that had become a tomb. Guilt, a dull, ever-present ache, gnawed at my insides, a constant companion since that night. I had come to this ancestral place, this sprawling, decaying manor, seeking a reprieve, a new beginning. But the house, it felt less like a sanctuary and more like a predator. I pulled out the leather-bound journal I'd found tucked away in the library of the ancestral home earlier that day, its pages brittle, smelling of dust and dried flowers. The script was spidery, faded ink from another century. It belonged to a distant relative, a woman named Elena, who had lived in the house during a period of intense historical unrest. I had only skimmed it then, but now, under the single, weak lamp I'd managed to find, her words began to coalesce into a chilling narrative. Elena wrote of a palpable sadness, a weight that settled upon the house after her husband's unexpected demise. She detailed her own slow descent into inconsolable grief, her inability to find joy, the way the very walls seemed to soak up her despair. "The house breathes my sorrow," she'd penned in one entry, the ink smudged as if by a tear. "It thrives on it, I feel its hunger." My breath hitched. Hunger, her children too suffered. One entry, dated years later, recounted the sudden, inexplicable illness of her youngest daughter Alice after a period of intense familial strife and Eliana's own renewed anguish over a lost inheritance. "Alice wastes away," Elena had written, the strokes jagged, frantic. "The light has gone from her eyes. It takes her strength as it takes mine. This place." I remembered the small, ornate child's shoe I'd found in the attic, the one with the faded lace. Alice, her story was not just one of a grieving mother, but of a family slowly being drained, withered by an unseen force. The estate agent's reputation began to take on a new, horrifying dimension. I flipped further, past years of increasing desperation, past accounts of further losses, small misfortunes that piled up, each one adding to the crushing burden of Elena's grief. It was as if the house, or whatever festered within it, gorged itself, then lay dormant, waiting for the next wave of despair to rise. My hands began to tremble, the journal rustling faintly. I could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent light above me, a low, barely perceptible thrum that seemed to vibrate in my teeth. The air grew heavy, thick, with an unspoken presence. I wasn't just reading a journal anymore. I was reading a warning. Elena's final entry was barely legible, scrawled across the last page, smeared and faded. "It waits for the broken," it read. "It draws them in, it feasts on what we feel most deeply, our sorrow, our failings, our guilt." My breath seized in my lungs. Guilt, my family's deaths, the fire, my part in it all. That raw, open wound of remorse I carried wasn't just a personal burden. It was an invitation, a beacon. This house hadn't just witnessed suffering, it had cultivated it. It wasn't a passive recipient of grief, it was an active harvester. The previous inhabitants hadn't just succumbed to misfortune, they had been preyed upon. Their sorrow, their despair, their deepest regrets, these weren't merely emotions. They were sustenance for something ancient and hungry. My skin crawled. The hairs on my arms stood on end. I froze, not daring to move, not daring to look. My eyes darted around the dimly lit mess hall. The faint clatter of a distant pipe, a sound I hadn't noticed before, now scraped at my nerves, sharp and sudden. But it was no use. The connection was clear, horrifyingly so. The estate agent's cryptic words, the history of the house, Elena's desperate warnings, and my own crushing burden of guilt, they all converged into a single, terrifying truth. I was trapped in a lair, and I was its latest, most potent offering. It had drawn me here, lured by the very grief and guilt that had been eating at me since the fire. It had waited, patient and insidious, for someone just like me to arrive. The key, it wasn't just an access point. It was an invitation to the feast. A faint, almost imperceptible scratching sound started from beneath the table, a tiny, insistent rasp against the linoleum. My eyes snapped open. Was it just the building settling, or was something else beginning to stir now that it knew I understood? My breath seized in my lungs. Guilt, my guilt. The word echoed in the silence of the mess hall, a monstrous bell tolling just for me, a beacon. This house, it hadn't just found me, it had called to me. It wanted what I brought, it fed on it. A wave of nausea hit me cold and sharp. I had to get out. Now, I pushed back from the table, the scraped wood of my chair groaning against the floor. The sound was too loud, a violation of the deep, waiting quiet that now pressed in from every direction. My eyes darted around the cavernous room. The air, thick with the lingering scent of boiled vegetables and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, felt heavy in my lungs. I could almost taste it, like rust on the back of my tongue. This place wasn't just old, it was predatory. I moved my legs stiff towards the double doors that led out of the mess hall and into the main corridor. Each step was a conscious effort, a fight against an invisible current that seemed to drag at my resolve. My fingers trembled as I twisted it. It wouldn't budge. Locked. I pushed harder, rattling the handle, but the doors remained stubbornly shut. I leaned in, listening. Nothing. No click of a faulty lock, no give in the mechanism. This couldn't be happening. I wasn't going to be trapped here. Not again. I spun around, my gaze sweeping the room for another exit. There was a smaller service door near the back, usually propped open during the day, leading to what I assumed was the kitchen. I strode towards it, my pace quickening, a desperate hope fluttering in my chest. The air grew heavier, as if the very space was compressing around me. I reached the service door, my hand closing around the plain steel knob. I twisted. It turned, thank God. I pulled. The door, however, remained sealed. It felt as if it had been welded shut. I pulled again, harder, grunting with effort, my muscles screaming. The door didn't even rattle. It was as if it had become part of the wall itself. Panic began to claw at my throat. My breath hitched, ragged and shallow. This wasn't just old locks failing. This was deliberate. I could feel it, a presence coalescing in the room, a silent observer. It was enjoying this. I backed away from the service door, my eyes wide, searching. The windows, they were large, spanning almost the entire length of one wall. They were old, true, but they opened. They had to. I sprinted towards the nearest window, my heart racing. The glass was thick, grimy, reflecting my distorted, fear-stricken face back at me. I fumbled with the latch, a stiff metal hook. It was rusted, fused. I tried to force it, my fingers scraping against the rough metal. I moved to the next window, then the next, my desperation mounting with each failed attempt, all of them immovably sealed. The air grew heavy with that metallic sweet scent, stronger now, almost suffocating. I could hear it, faint at first, then growing clearer, a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate from the very floorboards beneath my feet, through the walls, into my teeth. It was the house. It was alive, and it was singing. No, not that way. I refused. I turned back to the main doors, a last, irrational surge of defiance coursing through me. If I couldn't open them, maybe I could break them. I looked around for something, anything, a chair, a heavy plate. My eyes landed on a sturdy oak chair, heavier than the others. I hoisted it, the wood surprisingly light in my adrenaline-fueled grip. I lunged towards the doors, swinging the chair like a battering ram. The first blow struck with a dull thud, echoing through the silent room. No splintering wood, no cracking frame. I swung again harder, putting all my weight into it. The chair bounced back, jarring my arms. The doors remained impassive, unyielding. Stay. I dropped the chair, my breath hitched. I stood in the center of the mess hall, utterly defeated, my chest heaving, sweat trickling down my spine. Every exit was sealed. The house wasn't just old and dilapidated. It was a living, breathing prison. It had wanted me, and now it had me. What did it plan to do with its captive? My chest burned, a hollow ache that echoed the silence. The chair I'd dropped lay where it fell, a twisted metal skeleton on the grimy floor of the mess hall after lights out, chairs still warm. The residual heat was a phantom limb, a memory of bodies that had long since departed, leaving me alone with the spectral whisper that had pierced my skull. Mine. The word vibrated in the marrow of my bones, a parasitic echo. I stood frozen. The stale air thick, with the ghosts of forgotten meals, grease, lukewarm coffee, something vaguely metallic. My eyes darted around the cavernous room, past the overturned chair, past the rows of identical tables, each bearing the faint imprint of countless elbows and forearms. It wasn't an external sound. It was an invasion, a foreign consciousness taking root within me. I could feel my pulse hammering against my temples, a frantic drumbeat against the overwhelming quiet. My breath hitched, a ragged gasp in the suffocating stillness. This isn't just the house, I thought, a terrifying realization blooming in the pit of my stomach. It's inside me. I stumbled backwards, my hand brushing against a tabletop. The plastic surface was still faintly warm, a disturbing reminder of recent human presence, now replaced by something else, something ancient, something hungry. The images were fleeting, like nightmares half remembered, but the accompanying feeling was sharp and clear, an overwhelming, suffocating wave of guilt. Not my guilt, not entirely. It was a primal, inherited shame, thick and cloying like old blood. My knees buckled. I gripped the edge of the table, my grip tight, fighting for purchase against the onslaught. The mess hall spun around me, the tables blurring into an endless tunnel. A family tree, but instead of branches, it was roots, delving deeper into something foul. Each generation a transgression, each transgression a feeding. The entity wasn't just in the house, it was of my bloodline. The guilt, the grief, the fear, it wasn't just attracted to it, it demanded it. And then the house fire. Not the memory I carried, not the accident I'd lived with. This was different. This was a sacrifice. The flames roaring, consuming my family, my beautiful lost family. They hadn't been victims of a tragic flaw in my design. They had been offerings. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. I was not just a victim, not just a survivor. I was the last offering. The final ripe fruit on a withered tree, the culmination of generations of feeding. It had been waiting for me, for my unique blend of grief and guilt, a potent cocktail brewed over years, perfected by tragedy. The house, this ancestral home, was not a refuge. It was a trap, a larder. I slid to the floor, my back hitting the cold metal leg of a chair. My breath came in shallow, desperate gasps, and now it was my turn. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest, my mind reeling. My family's history wasn't just something to be mourned. It was a monstrous burden, a debt that had been passed down, generation after generation, until it finally landed on me. What kind of debt could demand such a price? The images slammed into me, a brutal, silent assault. Not just flashes, but a rapid-fire succession of sensations. The sickening crack of bone, the smell of something metallic and hot, the guttural gasp of a dying breath. It wasn't a memory, not mine, but something alien, something implanted. I felt the echo of terror, not my own, but a profound, ancient fear. My stomach lurched, bile rising in my throat. I stumbled backwards, my hand brushing against a tabletop. Something ancient, something hungry. The whisper returned. Not a word this time, but a cascade of images, violent and consuming. They weren't just images of violence, I realized, but of consumption. Of something being taken utterly, irrevocably. A life force, perhaps a spirit. It was feeding on the act of taking, on the trauma itself. It wasn't merely a parasite, it was a predator. My breath hitched. My knees felt weak, my vision blurred at the edges. This thing was beyond anything I'd ever conceived. It wasn't just a ghost, not a simple haunting. And my design, my terrible, flawed design, had given it everything it needed. My family, my guilt, my grief, a veritable feast. Anger. It had taken everything from me, my wife, my child, my peace, and now it was trying to take my sanity too, twisting my mind with its vile visions. No, not again. I wouldn't be a victim anymore. I wouldn't just cower and wait for it to finish me off. If this thing fed on trauma, then I would starve it. If it thrived on hidden secrets, then I would expose them. My hands clenched into fists, gripped tight. My jaw ached with the tension. I had been a builder and architect. I understood structures, foundations, hidden weaknesses. This house, this thing within it, was just another structure, however malevolent. It had a design, a purpose, and therefore it must have a flaw, a way in, a way out. I needed information. Not just about the house, but about my family. I needed to understand what they knew, what they hid, what they had built. My mind raced, sifting through fragments of old conversations, dusty memories of childhood visits, the vague, unsettling feeling that had always clung to this place. I moved not with panic, but with a new grim determination. My eyes, now accustomed to the gloom, scanned the walls, the floorboards, searching for anything out of place. An unusual seam in the wallpaper, a loose tile, a faint discoloration. I was no longer just seeing a dilapidated house. I was seeing a puzzle, a trap, and I was looking for the trigger. I remembered a section of the house, deep in the older wing, that my grandfather had always kept locked. He called it the old service quarters, but the way he said it, the slight tremor in his voice, had always bothered me. I'd never seen it myself, but the blueprints I'd found earlier, tucked away in the library, had shown a large, sprawling area, almost a separate building grafted onto the main structure, a communal space, a mess hall. I heard a faint scratching sound from behind a wall, then a sigh that seemed to ripple through the very timbers of the house. It was watching me. It knew what I was doing. Good, let it watch. I pushed open a heavy, unvarnished wooden door, its hinges groaning in protest. The air inside was thick and stagnant, heavy with the smell of dust, mildew, and something else. Something faintly sweet and sickly, like decay trying to mask itself. This was it. The mess hall after lights out, chairs still warm. A single, massive wooden table dominated the center, flanked by rows of mismatched chairs. I ran my hand over the worn plastic of a seat, then the smooth, aged wood of the tabletop. The warmth was undeniable, lingering, as if someone had just risen from their meal. But there was no one here. Only me, and the suffocating presence of something unseen. It wasn't just quiet, it was held, as if sound itself was afraid to exist. A contradiction, a trick. My architect's eye immediately went to the details. A large brick fireplace, long unused, dominated one end, but it was the floor that caught my attention, not just decorative but symbolic, like a sigil. I knelt, brushing away decades of dust. The pattern was geometric, angular, but with subtle, organic curves woven into its structure, like veins or roots. It seemed to converge on the center of the table, directly beneath where the warmest chairs were. It wasn't English, or any language I immediately recognized, but it looked ancient, sharp, and somehow hungry. What did this symbol mean, and why was it hidden beneath the very spot where people once gathered to break bread? I felt a wrenching sensation, as if something vital had been torn from my chest and replaced with cold, sharp shards. My vision blurred. The floor came up to meet me, or perhaps I fell into it. There was no impact, just a sickening lurch, a sudden plunge into a heavy, suffocating darkness that smelled of damp earth and something acrid, like burnt sugar. My head swam. I tried to push myself up, but my limbs felt like sodden timber, unresponsive. The images replayed in my mind, not as visions now, but as raw data imprinted. The snap, the metallic tang, the final, desperate breath. It wasn't just a memory, it was a fragment of experience, alien and terrible, now lodged deep within me. My eyes fluttered open, gritty and slow. A dull ache throbbed behind my temples. The air was thick, heavy with the ghosts of forgotten meals, stale coffee, yesterday's fried potatoes, the faint, sweet decay of overripe fruit. This was the mess hall after lights out. The chairs were still warm. I could feel the residual heat radiating from the polished wood of the table legs where my hand had instinctively reached out. Someone had been here recently, perhaps just minutes before I arrived or was brought here. There was I alone, my breath hitched. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest, every joint stiff. The memory of the implanted sensations still vibrated in my skull, a discordant hum. I stumbled to one of the tables, gripping its edge, my grip tight. The wood felt smooth beneath my fingers, worn by countless meals, countless hands. I dragged a chair out, its legs scraping loudly against the floor, and sank into it. The warmth of the seat was unsettling. It felt like an invitation, a trap. My gaze swept around the room, empty, or so I thought. My eyes narrowed, straining against the gloom. A figure emerged, slowly, cautiously, as if testing the air. It was a man, thin and stooped. His shoulders hunched. His hair was wispy, receding, and his clothes seemed too large for his frame, hanging loosely. He carried a stack of aged, leather-bound books clutched to his chest like a shield. For a moment, you wouldn't be. My throat was dry, constricted. What happened? I managed, the words barely a croak. The images from before, the sickening crack, the metallic smell surged back. What was that? The local historian took a tentative step forward, then another. He shuffled into a sliver of light, and I saw the tremor in his hands, the deep lines of fear etched around his eyes. Memories of its feeding, it wants to, imprint me. The word was a lead weight in my gut. It resonated with the feeling of the alien sensations, the foreign experience now lodged within me. My heart hammered against my ribs. What are I talking about? He hugged the books tighter, his grip tight. This house, it's a funnel, a conduit for something ancient. It doesn't just feed on grief and guilt, Raj, it consumes it. And the more it consumes, the stronger it grows. It uses the memories, the trauma of those who come here. It twists them, makes them its own. What was he saying? That the entity was cultivating me? To serve, he breathed, his eyes fixed on some point beyond my shoulder. To become part of it, to help it grow. It's a parasitic consciousness. It doesn't just want your sorrow, it wants all of you. And it starts by showing you what it has done, what it is. He gestured vaguely towards the books. These are the records, the true history of this place, not what the family kept secret, but what was left behind. The disappearances, the tragedies, the architects of your own past trauma, as you call them, they were just instruments, pawns to document, to expose. It encouraged me. Until it had enough. Until it could twist my desire for knowledge into something else. He looked at me then, his eyes pleading, desperate. You need to fight it, Raj. You need to reject its gifts. Another whisper in its walls. The sound was too loud, too sudden, too deliberate. The local historian flinched, his body recoiling as if struck. His eyes, already wide, dilated further, fixed on the doorway to the kitchen. His grip on the books loosened, and one of them, thick and ancient, slipped from his grasp, thudding to the linoleum floor. The caption beneath was in a cramped, archaic script I couldn't quite decipher, but the image itself spoke volumes of a brutal, unspeakable ritual. What was it trying to show me now? The clang from the kitchen tore through the quiet like a rusted nail scraping glass. It wasn't a casual sound. It was an exclamation, a punctuation mark. The local historian gasped, a choked noise, his body snapping back from the kitchen doorway as if yanked by an invisible rope. His eyes, already dilated from the dim light, widened further, fixed on the black moor of the entry. He seemed to shrink into himself, shoulders hunching, breath catching in his throat. It's heard us, he whispered, his voice thin, barely audible above the sudden, oppressive silence that followed the noise. He didn't need to say what it was. We both knew. The air in the mess hall after lights out. Chairs still warm from our recent conversation, suddenly felt thick and cold, pressing in from all sides. My own heart thudded, a frantic drum against my ribs, but it wasn't just fear. There was something else, a strange clarity, a stubborn resolve. He was a man of books and dusty archives, not this kind of confrontation. But I was the architect, the one who had built the cage, however unwittingly. And I was the one whose grief, whose guilt, had drawn this thing in. No, I said, my voice surprisingly steady even to my own ears. It wants us to know it's here, it wants us to run. The local historian shook his head, a quick, jerky motion. You don't understand, Raj. This isn't a chase, it's an invitation, a lure. He gripped my arm, his fingers surprisingly strong, digging into my flesh. You mustn't go, not deeper, you'll be lost to it. Lost to what? To myself. I was already half lost. My family, my life. All gone in a blaze of my own making. This house, this entity, it was merely the final echo of that fire, the last piece of ash. I pulled my arm free gently but firmly. I have to. The words felt predestined, carved into my bones. I have to see what's at the heart of it, what it truly wants. His gaze searched mine, a flicker of something ancient and weary in his eyes. He saw the determination, the grim acceptance. He knew arguing was futile. There are things below. Things I only read about in the oldest ledgers, places even the family avoided. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial murmur. They say it was built on sacrifice, generations of it, not blood, not always, but sorrow, guilt, and a hunger that never dies. He paused, then pointed towards the hearth in the sitting room which opened off the mess hall. The chimney, it's not just for smoke. There's a passage behind it, concealed, for the family who knew the truth. A shiver traced its way down my spine, but I acknowledged his warning with a nod. He had given me what he could. I turned towards the sitting room, the heavy antique furniture looming like silent judges. I ran my hand over the rough stone, searching. My fingers brushed against a faint seam, almost imperceptible, hidden beneath decades of soot and dust. I pressed, I pushed, I felt for any give. Nothing. Then a memory surfaced. A fleeting image from an old blueprint I'd studied, a detail I'd dismissed as an architectural quirk. A specific stone, slightly larger, at the base of the mantelpiece. I pressed the stone. A low, grinding rumble started deep within the wall, slow and heavy, like tectonic plates shifting. A passage. Something metallic and cloying, like old pennies and decay. It wasn't just the smell of an old cellar, it was the scent of something profoundly wrong. Something that had been sealed away for a very long time. I hesitated for only a moment, taking a deep breath, trying to steady the frantic beat of my heart. This was it, the final descent. I pulled out my phone, its flashlight beam a pathetic spear against the absolute blackness. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for my shoulders, dropping sharply down a series of uneven stone steps. The beam danced, revealing slick, moss-covered walls, water weeping from unseen cracks. Each step echoed, the sound absorbed by the suffocating quiet. I could feel the weight of the earth above me, the entire house pressing down. My breath plumed in front of me, visible in the weak light. I could hear a faint, rhythmic dripping somewhere ahead, like a slow, measured heartbeat. The steps ended abruptly, opening into a small, circular chamber. The flashlight beam struggled to penetrate the gloom. Strange, shallow indentations covered the surface, like countless hands had pressed into the mud, leaving their ghostly imprints. In the center of the chamber, illuminated by my wavering light, stood a single, crude altar, and on its surface not a cross or a statue, but a collection of objects that made my stomach churn. Faded photographs, brittle with age, curled at the edges, a child's worn wooden toy missing an eye, a tarnished silver locket, open to reveal two tiny, smiling faces. My family. My wife's smile. My son's bright eyes, my daughter's curly hair. My breath hitched. This was no ordinary haunting. This was a mirror, a twisted reflection. This was what the local historian had meant by sorrow and guilt. The entity didn't just feed on it, it mimicked it, it curated it. A low hum began, vibrating through the packed earth beneath my feet, rising from the very core of the house. The air grew impossibly heavy, crushing. The flashlight beam flickered, struggling. It pulsed with a sickening internal rhythm, and within its depths I saw them, the faces. My wife, my children, their expressions twisted, their eyes empty, accusing. My chest tightened, my hands trembled, the phone almost slipping from my grasp. This was the ultimate manifestation, the architect of my pain now given form. It wasn't just showing me my guilt. It was my guilt, given a terrible, hungry life. It was waiting, but for what? A shiver traced its way down my spine, but I acknowledged his warning with a nod. I watched him retreat, a hunched figure fading into the oppressive gloom of the house's upper levels, leaving me alone in the oppressive silence of the mess hall after lights out, chairs still warm. The lingering heat on the worn wood felt like a phantom touch, a ghost of recent life in a place that now felt profoundly dead. My breath plumed in the cold air, a stark contrast to the memory of warmth. The fear was a familiar ache, a dull throb behind my ribs, but it no longer paralyzed me. It sharpened my senses instead, honing my focus. The time for running, for hiding, for merely understanding was over. I had seen enough, felt enough, lost enough. The entity had fed on my grief, on my guilt, on the echoes of my family's tragedy, and I would not allow it another meal. This house, my ancestral burden, would not claim me, nor would it continue its insidious harvest. I rose, the scraping of the chair a violent sound in the stillness. My hands, architect's hands, had designed structures meant to shelter and protect. Now they would dismantle. The house was a machine, I realized, not just a dwelling. The colleagues' frantic whispers, combined with my own exhaustive study of the original blueprints, had finally clicked into place. The intricate ventilation system, the strategically placed hearths, the very flow of the air currents through its ancient bones. It wasn't just for comfort or efficiency. It was a conduit, a trap. It wasn't merely a smoke vent. It was the central artery, the house's malevolent heart. Every fireplace, every flue, every opening in this sprawling structure seemed to converge, however subtly, towards that central column, drawing the air, drawing the essence of the house upward. And with it, the grief, the guilt. The air grew heavy, thick with a scent like damp earth and old ashes. A low hum started, vibrating through the floorboards, through the soles of my boots. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears so much as felt in my teeth, a deep, resonant thrumming that seemed to emanate from the very stone. The entity knew. It felt my intent. I began to move not stealthily, but with purpose. Each step echoed loudly in the cavernous space. I needed to reach the base of that central chimney, to the foundation where its true purpose was anchored. The blueprints had shown a small, rarely used access tunnel beneath the mess hall, a forgotten crawl space leading to the chimney's lowest point. My great-grandfather, the architect who had expanded this place, had sketched it in, almost as an afterthought, a tiny detail I had initially dismissed. Now it was everything. The access panel was hidden behind a stack of ancient, moldering crates in a disused pantry off the mess hall. I heaved them aside, dust motes dancing in the weak beam of my headlamp. A rusted iron ring, almost invisible against the grimy wood, was my target. I pulled. The panel groaned, then gave way with a sickening thud. The hum intensified, a buzzing in my skull. I slid down, feet first, into the cramped tunnel. My lamp cut a weak path through the absolute blackness. The walls were rough-hewn stone, damp with condensation, pressing in on me from all sides. Then I saw it. The massive, subterranean base of the chimney, far larger than its visible portion, bloomed into a cavernous space. And within it, not stone, but something else. It wasn't solid, yet it wasn't vapor. This was it. This was the anchor. The reveal hit me with the force of a physical blow. The house hadn't just attracted the entity. It had been meticulously, brutally designed for it. My ancestors hadn't merely inherited a haunting, they had engineered it. The central chimney. The heart of the home was a funnel, a conduit, built to draw in suffering and channel it directly to this obscenity at its base. A legacy of horror, etched in stone and mortar. My breath hitched. I doubled over, gasping, the air thick with their phantom screams. The entity was fighting back, projecting my deepest fears, my most profound failures. But I wouldn't break. Not now, not here. I had come too far. I had a plan, born of desperation and the architect's understanding of structure. I had brought a satchel, heavy with tools, a heavy-duty pneumatic drill, specially modified charges, crude perhaps, but effective. If this house was a machine, I would jam its gears. I would destroy the central anchor. I fought through the psychological assault, forcing myself to stand, to breathe. My hands trembled, but I gripped the drill. The roar of its engine, when I fired it up, was deafening in the confined space, a defiant shriek against the entity's silent torment. The entity shrieked, a sound not heard, but felt a vibration that shook my very bones, threatening to liquefy my resolve. The tunnel walls groaned, dust and small stones rained down. It was trying to destabilize the tunnel, to bury me alive. I pushed harder, sweat stinging my eyes, the drill a vibrating extension of my will. One more push, one more crack in the foundation. One more point of failure. The house itself seemed to scream, a cacophony of groans and creaks, as if its very bones were protesting my assault. The smell of decay intensified, burning my nostrils. I felt a crushing pressure, as if the entire weight of the house was pressing down on me. Had I underestimated it? Had I merely poked the beast, awakening it to full fury, without the means to truly cage it? The silence was a physical thing, a thick, suffocating blanket that pressed against my eardrums until they rang. I tasted dust and something metallic, like old pennies, on my tongue. My lungs burned with each shallow gasp, and every muscle in my body trembled, a frantic, uncontrollable vibration that threatened to buckle my knees. I was still in the mess hall after lights out, chairs still warm, but everything else had changed. The air hung heavy, a palpable weight of spent energy and something else. Something acrid and bitter, like burnt sugar mixed with damp earth. My eyes, slow to adjust, scanned the devastation. The mess hall was a wreck. Tables lay on their sides, their scarred surfaces splintered, legs snapped like dry twigs. Chairs, once neatly arranged, were now a chaotic jumble of broken wood and fabric, some hurled against the far wall, others reduced to kindling. One, a sturdy oak piece, was impaled in the plaster ceiling, a grotesque trophy. The floor was a minefield of debris, shattered crockery, scattered cutlery, and a fine, pervasive layer of pulverized plaster that coated everything like fresh snow. I pushed myself up, a slow, agonizing effort. My left arm screamed in protest, a dull ache throbbing deep in the shoulder, and a thin line of warmth traced its way down my temple. I touched it, fingers coming away slick. Blood, not much, but enough to remind me that what had just happened wasn't a dream. It had been real, a struggle without physical blows, a battle waged in the very fabric of the house, in the depths of my own mind, and the entity's answer had been pure, unbridled destruction. The oppressive weight of its presence still lingered, a suffocating cold that seeped into my bones despite the exertion. It was like a void had been scooped out of the room, leaving behind an emptiness that felt heavier than any solid object. It hadn't been vanquished, not truly. It was merely dormant, starved, perhaps, but still here. I stumbled over a broken table leg, catching myself against a crumbling wall. My fingers sank into the damp plaster, dislodging more of it. The wall itself seemed to breathe, a slow, almost imperceptible undulation. Cracks spiderwebbed across the once smooth surface, fresh scars that hadn't been there moments ago. They stretched from floor to ceiling, hinting at a deeper fracture within the very structure of the house. The ancestral home, once a symbol of legacy, now felt like a dying beast, gutted and bleeding from an unseen wound. I had fought it, or at least pushed it back, and the house had paid the price. A glint of something caught my eye, half buried beneath a pile of rubble where the north wall had partially collapsed. It wasn't just plaster and wood. A section of the outer wall, a thick, load-bearing stone, had buckled inward, revealing a cavity behind it. This wasn't just damage. It was an opening, an accidental reveal. Curiosity, sharper than my pain, pulled me forward. I limped towards the gaping more in the wall, the scent of ancient, undisturbed earth growing stronger. I knelt, wincing as my bruised knee hit the gritty floor. No carvings, no ornate details, just a simple, unadorned rectangle sealed tight. It felt impossibly old, radiating a stillness that was both comforting and utterly unnerving. How long had it been hidden there? Was this an intentional concealment, or merely a forgotten relic of the house's past, exposed by the entity's tantrum? I reached in, my fingers brushing against the rough stone of the cavity, then closing around the box. It was heavier than it looked, solid and resolute. The wood was cool against my clammy skin. I pulled it free, cradling it in my good arm. A thin layer of dust clung to its surface, undisturbed for decades, perhaps centuries. This was no ordinary box. It had been shielded from the entity's destructive outburst, almost protected. I ran a thumb over its smooth lid, searching for a latch, a seam, anything to indicate how it opened. Nothing. It was a perfect, seamless cube. A faint, almost imperceptible scent wafted from it, like dried herbs and old paper. It promised answers, yet offered only more questions. Was this what the previous caretaker had tried to warn me about? A tool? A prison? What secret did this silent, heavy box hold? My lungs burned with each shallow gasp, and every muscle in my body trembled, a frantic, uncontrollable vibration that had yet to subside. I was in the mess hall after lights out, chairs still warm from the bodies that had occupied them hours ago. The residual warmth was a cruel comfort, a phantom touch in the otherwise empty room. I sat slumped at one of the long, scrubbed tables, my hands flat on the scarred wood, feeling the grain dig into my palms. My eyes were wide open, staring into the impenetrable gloom beyond the single emergency light that pulsed faintly over the entrance, casting long, wavering shadows. Every breath felt like grit in my throat, a dry rasp against my windpipe. The air hung heavy with the ghosts of forgotten meals and the acrid tang of cleaning solution, but beneath it all I smelled something else, a faint, cloying sweetness, like decay hidden beneath blooming flowers. It was the scent of the house, the entity, clinging to my clothes, my skin, my very lungs. It had followed me, or perhaps it had always been a part of me, a scent of my own inherited ruin. I squeezed my eyes shut, but the images were branded behind them, the twisting shadows, the whispering walls, the eyes that were not eyes but hollows of pure hunger. I had faced it, had stared into the more of my family's legacy, and somehow I had survived. My guilt, the very fuel it craved, had almost consumed me. It wasn't just a house, it was a snare. My ancestral home was not a passive vessel for evil, but an active participant, a complicit structure. I had designed houses, structures meant to protect, to shelter, to nurture life. But this house was different. It was a contraption, a grim machine designed to harvest. It collected grief, channeled it, magnified it. And my own grief, my own crushing guilt over the fire that took my family, had been the ultimate offering. I had fed it not with sacrifice, but with my very being. It wasn't just the entity that was old. The method was old. The house, in its very bones, in its intricate layout, in the forgotten nooks and hidden passages, was a testament to a generational horror. A dusty, leather-bound book, tucked away in the forgotten study, filled with archaic script and crude, unsettling diagrams. I had dismissed it, as the ramblings of a mad ancestor, an eccentric's obsession with geometry and the alignment of sorrow. The book detailed specific structural modifications, esoteric symbols carved into load-bearing timbers, precise orientations of chambers to align with the currents of sorrow. It wasn't just superstition, it was a blueprint. My ancestors, architects themselves, had built this house not just to live in, but to cultivate something, to channel, to focus, to amplify the very emotions the entity consumed. They hadn't merely harbored the malevolent presence, they had engineered a perfect environment for it, a perpetual engine fueled by the pain of their descendants. And I, Raj, the guilt-ridden architect, had been the unwitting inheritor of both the house and its grisly purpose. My own designs, my own unwitting connection to the family legacy, had only strengthened its hold. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs again, passed down, evolving, waiting for the right kind of grief to activate its true potential. And I had provided it. The entity wasn't just in * the house, it was inextricably linked to its very fabric, its architecture, its design. To destroy the entity, I couldn't just burn the house down like the last one. That would only release it, set it free to seek another such structure, another source of suffering. No, I had to unmake it. I had to dismantle the machine, brick by agonizing brick, timber by cursed timber, until its purpose was utterly annihilated. It would be a slow, painstaking process, a solitary endeavor, but it was the only way to sever the connection, to break the cycle, to ensure no other Raj, no other grief-stricken soul would ever feed this monstrous design again. A fragile peace settled over me, not a piece of comfort, but of grim, unwavering purpose. My hands still trembling, curled into fists on the tabletop. My life, my skills, everything I had learned would now be dedicated to this undoing. But could I truly dismantle something that had become so intertwined with the very earth, the very air, and the very blood of my family?